Ok, vamos a empezar. Les voy a comentar buenos días. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Les queremos hacer esta presentación. Espero que les parezca útil. En un momento vamos a dividir en dos canales, el canal en español y el canal en inglés. Para que, porque el señor Richard Contrada, que es quien que va a dar la presentación, no habla español, entonces yo tengo sus notas y las voy a leer. Y bueno, nada, entonces les voy a indicar cómo hacer el cambio de canal en el momento necesario. Voy a comenzar contándoles que, bueno, no sé si me conocen a mí, yo estuve en una presentación en marzo, soy del Instituto de Investigación para la Salud Pública de la Universidad de Rutgers, soy navegador comunitario, y si tienen alguna pregunta después de la presentación, o la ponen en el chat, o simplemente esperan hacia el final y nos vamos a volver a juntar en un mismo canal para poder yo traducirle al doctor Contrada sus preguntas. Bueno, como les dije, pertenezco al Instituto de Investigación de la Salud para la Salud Pública, y nosotros somos un polo de investigadores de diferentes disciplinas enfocados en mejorar la salud de la población. La investigación en la salud de la población se realiza para aprender más sobre la salud humana y los factores que influyen en la salud de la población entera. Nuestras investigaciones se enfocan en la situación sanitaria y los factores que la determinan y cómo influenciar estos dos a través de servicios de salud pública y políticas de intervención en salud. ¿Por qué es fundamental participar en investigaciones de este estilo? Trabajamos para descubrir las diferencias en salud por raza y etnicidad, investigar y romper barreras para el acceso a la salud para las minorías, aumentar la representación de comunidades diversas en los estudios clínicos y tratamientos médicos, y traducir las conclusiones de los estudios de investigación en políticas públicas y prácticas médicas. En este momento estamos realizando diferentes estudios de investigación sobre temas como Alzheimer, el impacto del COVID, el estrés, la resiliencia en la población migrante, vamos a estar en contacto. Ana y Rosa tienen mis contactos, entonces si están interesados en saber un poquito más sobre, que alguien, digamos, les llame por teléfono y les cuente un poquito cómo son nuestros estudios de investigación y cómo es participar en ellos, ya les estaremos enviando información sobre eso. Ahora me gustaría presentarles el doctor Richard Contrada. Es el profesor de psicología de la Universidad de Rutgers, y digamos, dentro de sus investigaciones, él estudia todo lo que tiene que ver con la salud mental y cómo temas de salud mental impactan en la salud física de los seres humanos. Y bueno, nada, y ahí en el chat también les puse que a partir de ahora les va a salir un mensaje que dice que tienen que cambiar de canal, es decir, que tienen que elegir el canal que dice Spanish. Y también al mismo tiempo tienen que bajar el volumen del doctor Richard, que ahí mismo se van a dar cuenta. Si tienen dificultad, por favor, me avisan. We can start now.
Okay, good morning. I hope you're doing well. It's very nice to be with you today. I'm going to be talking about stress and how to cope with stress. Everybody knows what stress is. Yet, if you ask different people, you will get different answers. It's the same thing with coping. We all have ideas about what coping is, but different people have different ideas about coping. So stress and coping have many meanings, and these are different for different people. In fact, there are so many different meanings that they seem to cover all aspects of life. Sometimes it may feel like everything is stressful and everything we do about it is coping. In everyday language, stress is sometimes out there. For example, we may say, I have been under a lot of stress, as though stress is outside and above us. This may come from the use of the word stress in engineering, where it refers to an external force that can affect an object or a structure, like a heavy truck on a small bridge. Another common expression is, I am stressed out. This makes it seem like stress is not outside the person, but it is something inside of them. Still, another expression is, I am stressing. This seems to say that stress is something a person does, that we create stress ourselves. And stress is also associated with emotions, such as anger, sadness, and anxiety. And it's associated with feeling under pressure or feeling pressed for time, or feeling like we cannot meet our responsibilities. So all of these expressions are in some sense accurate, and we can combine them and say that stress is complex, and it includes, first, the situations, the events, and the ongoing conditions, which we can call stressors, that have the potential to cause a stress reaction. Second, stress involves psychological processes that are initiated by stressors. Third, we have biological responses to stress. And fourth, there are stress outcomes, such as physical health and mental health problems. All four of these components need to be kept in mind when we think about stress. Coping refers to mental and behavioral responses that are aimed at managing stress and its impact. A list of all such responses would be very long. To simplify, we can distinguish between problem-focused coping. Excuse me. Problem-focused coping is aimed at dealing directly with the stressor. And we can distinguish emotion-focused coping, which is aimed at reducing how stressed we feel. For example, problem-focused coping might include forming a plan or taking action to change the situation or seeking advice from someone else. Examples of emotion-focused coping might include refusing to believe what has happened, expressing negative feelings, or seeking emotional support from others. Sometimes it is hard to say whether a particular coping response is more focused on the problem or on our subjective feelings. What may be most important is to cope by staying actively involved and trying to deal with both the situation that's out there and with our feelings, rather than becoming disengaged and giving up. So what we are saying is that things that happen to us in life can act as stressors. Things that require us to cope, to adapt, or to make adjustments. And these are not just things that we would describe as bad. For example, childbirth, weddings, graduations, these kinds of things can be stressful, even if everything goes well and exactly as expected. Once these events and conditions happen, we appraise them or we evaluate them. If we feel they threaten us with some possible future harm or loss, or if we believe that harm or loss have already occurred, this leads to stress responses. Psychological stress responses may include negative emotions, but not necessarily. We may feel a sense of challenge or excitement when we're stressed. And we may respond by coping in various ways, by changing what we think, or by changing what we do to prevent or to reduce the threat, the harm, or the loss, or what we do to meet the challenge. And our bodies respond to stress. The brain is involved. That is where we perceive and interpret the stressor and form our coping responses. The brain communicates with the rest of the body through two systems. One is the autonomic nervous system, which is a network of nerves that allows the brain to control and to change how the rest of the body is functioning. The second way the brain communicates with the rest of the body is through neuroendocrine systems. These serve the same kinds of functions as the autonomic nervous system, but they do so by sending chemical messengers throughout the body, through the bloodstream in the circulatory system. There are many ways that stress can be bad for us. It can affect our sense of well-being or our quality of life. It can promote mental health problems such as anxiety and depression, emotional eating, drinking too much alcohol, or using tobacco or drugs. And it can promote physical health problems, such as heart disease and infectious conditions. Stress also can be bad for our social relationships. Our biological response to stress evolved because it provided a way to deal with physical emergencies. Our ancestors would often face dangerous animals, human enemies, or other physical threats. To survive, the main options often were either to fight or to flee. That is why one part of the body's stress mechanism is known as the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response involves increases in heart rate, in blood pressure, and in breathing. And this delivers more blood to the large muscles that we use to fight or to run. Our blood contains fuel. The two main forms of fuel are oxygen and sugar. When facing a physical emergency, the fight or flight response delivers those fuels to the large muscles that we need to defeat our to defeat our enemy, or to escape the situation. This worked well thousands of years ago. But in 2022, it is not always the best way to cope, even with physical emergencies. And the fight or flight response is often activated by psychological stressors for which fighting or fleeing may be very bad ways to cope. Another way we are different from our ancestors is that we generally live longer. It turns out that the fight or flight response, if it occurs often enough nowadays, it can contribute to the development of heart diseases. Our ancestors did not generally live long enough for this to happen. So the tendency for fight or flight responses was passed down through many generations. Historians believe that we did not start to live long enough for heart disease to develop until the early 1900s. That is when many infections that were the main sources of illness came under control. Life expectancy began to increase, and so did the incidence of heart disease. Even now with the pandemic, heart disease is a big health problem, and it will continue to be a big health problem when the pandemic ends. So, what can we do about this? The term stress management refers to various techniques that we can use to deal with stress. You are already familiar with many of these. We can divide them up into groups depending upon which part of the stress process they address. However, most stress management techniques work in more than one way. First, we can manage the stressors, the events and conditions. It's important to recognize and to anticipate the potential stressors in our lives. Of course, ideally, we would prevent them from happening in the first place, or we would avoid them when they do occur. At the very least, if we can recognize a stressor before it occurs, we may be able to plan ways to cope with it. Once we are exposed to a stressor, through psychological processes, we can try to cope with it directly and minimize its negative effects. Thinking is a big part of this. Our fight or flight response wants us to take immediate, aggressive action. But if possible, we should first stop and think. Are we sure the situation is as bad as it seems? What can be done about it? Is there someone who can help? Is there a way we can benefit from the experience? Can we learn from it? Can we use it to be better prepared to cope with similar stressors in the future? For example, by remembering what kind of coping worked and what kind of coping did not work. We can also be careful about how we express our emotions. For example, rather than raising our voices in an angry way, we can try to calmly explain that the situation is frustrating for us. We can make it clear that we're not attacking or blaming the other person. We're just expressing how we feel. And we can ask the other person if they understand our feelings, and we can ask them to describe their own feelings. Depending on the nature of the stressor, there may be ways to deal with it directly through our behavior. For example, if we are anxious about a doctor visit, we can bring a list of questions and we can be prepared to take notes. Or if we have too much to do in a limited amount of time, we can see if we can make a list of priorities. Maybe we can decide that some of these things can be delayed. Or maybe we can find someone to help, or even to take on some of the things we need to do. If we need to speak with someone who we often disagree with, we can try to be prepared and to plan on being patient and understanding. Then there's the body. It is important to protect our bodies, not just to protect our thoughts and feelings from the effects of stress. Prayer and meditation have been shown to have a calming effect on the body's fight or flight response. Engaging our minds in something that's interesting or entertaining may reduce the negative emotions that otherwise would affect our bodies. And moderate physical activity, even just walking, can calm our bodies, as can simple relaxation. There are also specific techniques that we can learn, such as certain breathing exercises that are good for the body and that focus our attention so that negative thoughts and feelings are reduced. The outcomes of stress involve health, and maintaining our physical health strengthens the body in its ability to withstand the effects of stress. This includes the usual recommendation to get adequate sleep and eat a healthy diet. And when we have signs and symptoms of a health problem, it is a good idea to talk to our doctors about the possible role of stress and about the possible role of stress management in addition to medical treatment. What you see here is a list of resources that you can use that describe different stress management techniques. These are available on the internet, and Maria is going to make sure you get a copy of this, so you don't need to write down anything right now. But I would encourage you to check out these sources of stress management techniques. And you will also be receiving a list of different health centers in the Newark area where you can get help dealing with various kinds of problems, including problems that involve stress and health. And as you can see, it's a very long list. So there are many potential resources out there to help you to deal with this problem of stress. So that's all I planned to say today. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.